Hello and welcome to the Economic Times India Leadership Council HSBC Breakfast Series, wherein leading luminaries from key industries chart out a growth roadmap for India Inc. through power-packed discussions and deliberations. In this special episode, we bring you exclusive highlights of the event conducted across 3 cities. Our first session was conducted in Delhi and brings you an exclusive conversation with Krishnamurthy Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, who shared his unique insights on how the Indian economy may evolve in the 2021-2022 fiscal.
To really brainstorm how we, work together for our individual, organizational, but more importantly, our collective growth aspirations for the country. And we've got eminent leaders here sharing their views. I was initially going to say Chatham House rules would apply, but clearly, I suppose the intent is very much to have an open conversation, right? And I'd specifically like to welcome Ashwini.
Thank you, sir.
For actually moderating for today. Ashwini, over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your very generous introduction, and welcome, Dr. Krishnamurthy. I will invite Dr. Subramaniam to please share his views and thoughts on what he sees is to be the state of the Indian economy and the path forward.
The belief, and I said this even before the pandemic, a lot of commentators basically were saying demonetization, GST and all that has affected the fundamentals of the economy. I did not believe that at all, because actually, having done research on the financial sector and followed the Indian financial sector for the last more than two and a half decades, I was absolutely clear that this decline before the pandemic was only because of the financial sector, the mess that was created before 2014 through the bad lending, the bad crony lending. And research in financial economics teaches us that across the world, whenever problems manifest in the financial sector, they're far more long-lasting than problems coming in the real sector. And I think the last 2 crises globally is actually the brilliant example of this, which is that after the global financial crisis, the overhang persisted for a while, with several countries, Ireland, Greece, etc., coming under sovereign stress. While you see with the COVID crisis last year, unprecedented decline, but this year global growth, unprecedented increase. And I think that's just sort of an anecdotal way of trying to make the point that I'm making. So you should never mess with the financial sector. The Honorable Prime Minister, in his recent CIA address, said that earlier reforms were done due to compulsion. Now reforms have been done with conviction. And I think this is the country's leader saying that reforms have been done with conviction, conveys to you, how, what would be the path forward. If you look at the 1991 reforms vis-a-vis the reforms now, there's a very important distinction. 1991 was as important, let's not, because it was a mindset change, and we've continued. I think this is another mindset change as well. 1991 reforms were about product market reforms. In other words, opening up product markets to actually foreign competition as well. While these reforms are primarily factor market reforms, those that will get benefit from the reform, are a majority who oftentimes do not, pay as much attention to what the benefits will be. There is uncertainty about the benefits. When will they come to those benefits? In contrast to the vocal minority knows very well the costs are coming for them. The silent majority does not know as well. So reform always pits a vocal minority that wants status quo to be maintained versus a very silent but a very large majority. I have absolutely no doubt in saying that these reforms are as path-breaking, if not more, compared to 1991. Let me, end by saying that these reforms actually will really enable investment, because, in privatization will put assets in the hands of people who are more efficient. Even asset monetization will bring out assets that are actually idle in the economy, and therefore investment would go up and productivity gains will happen as well. And we're of course seeing what is happening with the startup economy. When you actually enable, and this is what Adam Smith and before that people like Kautilya also said. Incidentally, if you go and read Arthashastra, one of the things that Kautilya says is, "Hey king, it is your duty to remove all the restrictions on economic activity." What he's saying, you remove the restrictions on economic activity and go watch the fun, the amount of economic activity that happens. And that is what Indian entrepreneurs are capable of. We're seeing it with the startup ecosystem as well. As you basically remove these restrictions, actually, I mean, there should be some restrictions because there are market failures, but then go watch the fun, actually, startup activity, more than 100 unicorns now. In the month of August, the IPOs that we had was a 17-year high. In other words, before 2004 is when we had in a month this many number of IPOs. So all this is because of policy. It is not just luck. I think let's be very, very clear. It is policy that is reflecting, and that policy, the way I see it, is here to stay, given the fact that it reflects the sentiment of the common citizen.
I am absolutely optimistic that our people are open to learning, especially when it comes to meeting their aspirations. The middle class, the emerging middle class in India is highly aspirational. They want the best for their kids. They want the best of standard of living for themselves. And to make that happen, if they have to learn, relearn, reskill, retool, I think they will go for it. From an aspiration perspective, from a learning perspective, from an intention perspective, and from a to execute based on our intent, I think India is most dynamic, one of the most dynamic countries in the world.
So one learning from the COVID is like we learned to live or learn to operate work from home. We had that capacity, we have built that infrastructure in terms of VPN, etc. And of course, looking at the kind of changing preferences of the customers, where the customers prefer to spend online rather than actually going to the point of sale kind of locations, we started investing heavily in technology and digital. Our digital channels are very, very robust, particularly in terms of servicing and collections. We covered all the kind of journeys that are possible for the customer. And automation wise, we have implemented a lot of automation for gaining internal efficiencies as well as for providing superior customer experience.
We have the best policies, we have the best guidance. Our challenge is not policy, our challenge is the implementation of the policy and how we interpret policy and how we implement it on the ground. That is a governance issue, not a policy level issue. Having said that, I think the big issue that I see is how do we see the revival of the SME sector, and that, to my mind, is the core engine of the Indian economy because it has the largest opportunity for job creation.
Welcome back. Our next session, organized in Mumbai, hosted a fireside chat among renowned stalwarts on the entrepreneurial ascent and expanding sweep of equity markets.
At HSBC, it is our vision to get the leaders to discuss the future trends and the business thereon. In this endeavor, we have tied up with ETILC, and we are doing this series. My special thanks to our speaker, Dr. Jayant Sinha, Mr. Ashish Chauhan, Mr. Ashish Shah. So thank you all three of you for being there with us. I now hand over to Mr. Sriram, Director of Strategic Communication at Factors and former editor of Economic Times. So I hand over to you.
Thank you, Dhaval. We have now looking back to the future with a fair bit of growth and optimism, and there is probably no better set of people here to discuss the topic that we have at hand and discuss the economic growth and potential, and how is it that we as a country can finally come out of the slump and out of this trough and peak period and engage in a very steady and sustainable growth path, so that we attain the 5 trillion economic GDP vision that we have set for ourselves. I would like to start by asking Dr. Jayant Sinha, what does the near-term future hold now, at least for the next 1 or 2 years, and assuming that there is no third wave and there is no major variant that comes and attacks us? What is the next 1 or 2 year forecast that you have, sir, given the fact that there have been a fairly serious economic measures that have been unveiled by the government in the last 1 year or so?
with the pace of the vaccinations having picked up as much as they have, and the incredible fiscal and monetary stimulus that has happened around the world, we are in fact seeing a pretty good recovery. The central banks around the world, including the Indian Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of India, the central banks around the world are pumping $300 billion a month. That's how we can come out of this dip that we have seen because of the pandemic and get to a situation where we have self-sustaining growth going forward. What I must really highlight for all of you is that even as we had to deal with these issues associated with the pandemic, the government has taken many bold and courageous steps as far as the economy is concerned to really take on some of these important reform steps. The net result of this in the near term, the $3 trillion question, is we are poised starting the end of this year, early next year, to go into what I have called and written about as the roaring 20s. And in the roaring 20s, I see three very powerful growth drivers that will get us then to the 5 trillion. The first, of course, is that the government has undertaken very major capex programs. The other growth driver is exports. And the third major driver, and again here at some level we have to thank the central banks, are startups. India is the second large startup ecosystem after the US, and the number of startups, unicorns and so on that are happening is something we've never seen before. The quality of the growth and how we deal with two principal challenges becomes very important. Two challenges are very important. One is job creation. So job creation is going to be vital in terms of how we achieve the 5 trillion. The second major challenge, the biggest investment opportunity that is in front of us is the green transformation. And there I call what we have to do is getting to the green frontier, because we have to go to net zero. Net zero is going to be net positive. That, to my mind, personal view, is our journey from 3 to 5 to $10 trillion. Thank you very much.
I'll just quickly want to just shift to Ashish. Now, what according to you, sir, is the reason why the markets are so buoyant?
We are living in a what I call dynamic disequilibrium world, where disequilibrium also moves from one place to another. Basically, because the COVID came as a huge shock, some of the trends which were going to kind of go over for 25 years or manifest themselves over 25 years, they actually ended up accelerating themselves in 1 or 2 years. So you see a huge amount of changes. Basically, COVID came as a tsunami. And it's not only us who tried doing reforms. So it's not only us who are basically going through that. Everyone else is also trying to come out of it in a different way. But there is a single technology that has been evolved over the last 50 years, monetary stimulus. So I have a tremendous hope for India's future.
Ashish Shah, what is the contribution that you think the startup community can actually make towards achieving this growth potential?
I think what has happened in the last 2 years is that, if you just look at digital economy, I think India has activated more number of people in the last 1.5 years as compared to what we activated in the last 15 years, right? So suddenly all of these new businesses are in front of us, and therefore just the overall believability, on what startups can do has changed significantly, right? And that's how we should look at startups going ahead, which is, if times come of acceleration, that is when we realize how big these businesses can become, right? The second thing that comes to mind is, startups actually have this inherent, ability, if done well, to change the behavior of, how consumption is happening in the country. They have potential to change the behavior of how things would happen going ahead. The third thing is, for the next 2 decades, I do not see any dearth of capital. If you have a great idea, entrepreneurs and businesses would be willing to fund you. And therefore, I truly believe that this is our time.
Great, thank you, Ashish. May the excitement continue and may more wealth get created. Thank all of you, and I thank Economic Times.
I think firstly, I'm glad that there is a clear target that has been set. I think the alignment towards the target is important, and then each lever which facilitates that target has to be enabled. And for me, 3 levers will matter. First is when you say 5 trillion, ultimately you have to cater to those levels of consumption. When you talk about consumption, it's local, it's global. In local, I think we need to move up the value chain. Global is all about exports, and that actually gives around to the second point, which is about competitiveness. We have to make our manufacturing competitive. I mean, it's nice, the whole initiative around Make in India, around ease of doing business, but it needs to have more delivery on the ground. And I think, again, if you look at the one single sector that will enable that delivery, it is infrastructure. And of course, the government has to come out with ways to fund that infrastructure. So I think those are critical. I think the last one that I would talk would be about efficiencies. It has to be a very holistic effort in general. Ease of doing business is a very, very big term, but it has to be analyzed at a granular level and then facilitated, and have the right people who can give the right inputs. If all this is done, I feel I'll be very confident about the delivery.
India is poised for phenomenal growth, and I think in the world today there's no better opportunity than India because of the young population, the fantastic level of technology that we've adopted, and also a government which has enabled businesses, like we've seen. So India's had 28 unicorns over in this year, 2021 itself. The sky is the limit for India, and I think $5 trillion is definitely going to happen. The question is when it's going to happen. Possibly we should look at even a larger number of like $10 trillion. And the amazing thing is that now we have a government which has a vision and which is kind of committed to execute that vision.
I'm optimistic about the mid to long term for sure. I'm a little hesitant about the short term because I do feel like while a lot of comments were made around the businesses per se, the large businesses having extraordinary profits, I struggle with how that's going to be sustainable in the short to mid term, because the unorganized sector is really struggling. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a few shocks, but the mid to long term I absolutely agree. But I do have some kind of concerns around the extreme short to mid term.
Welcome back. In our Bangalore session, you will receive the perspective of Senapati Chris Gopalakrishnan on innovation and its criticality to India Inc.'s growth trajectory in the new world order.
Here we are today to deliberate the nuances of the most sought-after segment from India Incorporated, innovation and startups. As we stand currently, the globe is eyeing the developments made on this vertical of our industry, which is new age, innovative and much disruptive. The rising IPOs from Indian startups have been a close watch for many, and while most of you would be involved in this segment in some form, each time the discussions on startups discovers a new dimension, I'm sure you'll all agree. Amongst us here today, we have Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan, whose name resonates with the word innovation and startup. My special welcome is also due to Ms. Archana Rai, Senior Editor, Economic Times.
Chris is sort of synonymous with the word innovation, I think, given his long involvement with industry, being at the cutting edge of developments. So how you view India's innovation index really, and how do you rate India's readiness to go forward into an innovation and a knowledge economy?
In today's world, when changes are very rapid, the speed of change is very high right now. As a country, as a business, as an enterprise, as a leader, in every aspect, we need to reinvent ourselves continuously. We need to do that to stay relevant. As a nation, we need to create jobs of the 21st century. We need to create businesses of the 21st century. We need to be setting ourselves for the future, right? And every industry is going to change. Every single industry, without, leaving out anybody. Education, healthcare, the automotive sector, e-commerce. You are already seeing that. Retail, manufacturing. Every industry will go through changes, be it services, be it manufacturing, and so, as a nation, we need to create a 21st century economy. So we need to do this, I firmly believe. Now readiness, coming to the question of readiness. I look at readiness as knowledge, creation, the capability and the talent necessary to do this, resources that are needed, including funding, etc., and a regulatory framework, a policy framework, because government has an important role to play. And last but not the least, the acceptance of the society for change.
I thought I'd draw you back to one particular point, and this also is from something that you yourself have said in the past, right? It's about the cultural sort of ethos that you need to build in a society and an economy to foster innovation. You had said that, you know, the thing that differentiates a startup, say, from an old economy company is the way passion is brought into the game, whereas it is the passion to win that defines a startup. How do you start thinking like a startup?
It's actually setting the right goals, setting expectations with the stakeholders, you know, about the need to take risks, about the need to experiment, about the need to pivot, about the need to accept failures, etc. Prepare the stakeholders for this. What I mean by this is the startups do that. So,
True.
you know, that's why I said that, you know, they play to win.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas a existing enterprise plays to not lose. Very different focus, actually.
True.
You know, in today's world, if you don't change, if you don't transform, you die, or actually, I think even worse, you have a slow death. And I'm trying to bring a sense of urgency into these things, and we need to do these things.
So, but my point really is that also requires a certain amount of risk-taking. Is that learnt behavior? How do Indian enterprises or even Indian professionals, how do they embrace that? How do they cultivate that? Yeah.
So risk is always there. It's just about the ability to manage risk. You know, how do you prepare yourself to take the risk? And that is what is important. You know, risk is all around us. There is absolutely no way that we can predict anything in today's world.
Sure. And on the matter of risk, I think one of the important things for change to happen also is money. And we know there is a whole lot of money available for people who are willing to take those risks. You have also mentioned that a lot of the investment that can happen in India in startups from sectors and you know, individuals also or organizations would be one way of getting into this innovation economy is by investing and participating in it. Do you see that as a first step itself in embracing risk and really entering into the innovation and the knowledge economy?
You know, when you look at you know, CDC and beyond funding, 95% of the funding comes from non-Indian sources.
Comes from overseas.
Right? So when you look at CDC companies, you know, a lot of the risks are mitigated at that point. You know, this is one interesting thing about the startup ecosystem is there's a strong filtration happening. Only the best survive. And so when it comes to CDC, etc., they are really the best, and you know, they're well funded, they have business plans, their product market fit, they've got customers, and they're scaling up now. They're in the growth stage. So a lot of the risks are mitigated. And at that point, you know, if that company is majority owned by outside investors, the wealth created by the success will also accrue to investors outside the country.
Yeah.
We are missing out on that wealth, right? It's not that, you know, India doesn't have the money to invest. We need to prepare ourselves and we need to invest in that. So thank you all very much. I enjoyed this interaction, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Chris.
The innovation is going to spread across every sector. I do think areas which are really ripe for more innovation to happen are areas like healthcare, areas like agriculture, areas like purely collaboration, because the work is going to shift to where talent is located, which is including small towns rather than traditionally where the work has been, which is big cities. So some of these areas are going to be really disruptive in terms of solutions and services that are going to be built on top of it.
India is on a roll when it comes to the startup ecosystem, and the areas which are really gaining traction are consumer tech, fintech, SaaS businesses, and of course these are the areas where, of course, there's a huge opportunity for startups from India to really bring investors from around the world. And of course, a lot of international businesses would like to also come down to India to set up their bases in these areas. So really excited to see the way the ecosystem is building up and the technologies that are coming from India, especially the artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, blockchain, and quite a few other technologies. And robotics is another one which is actually building up. So quite excited about it, and India is becoming a market to the world.
India and Indians have an amazing quality of innovating to solve problems. There's innovation everywhere. I think the important thing is to figure out and observe and bottle it and apply these use cases to solve big problems. And I think that's, the problems and similar problems are everywhere, whether it's convenience to order food or transportation or living or comfort or wellness or health. So innovation can be applied to all of these things. And the key is to be really, really curious and figure out how we are solving problems for ourselves or people are solving problems, and then figure out how to apply it at a large scale.